At 11:14 on the morning of January 12, 1944, a single drop of sweat rolled down the bridge of Marine Platoon Sergeant Arthur Mac McDonald's nose, hanging there, burning his eyes. He did not blink. He could not move. He was lying face down in a ditch filled with stagnant, black water on the edge of the perimeter at Cape Gloucester, New Britain. The air was 96 degrees, thick with the stench of rotting vegetation and cordite, and completely devoid of wind. Less than 10 yards away, hidden somewhere in the dense, interlocking canopy of the jungle overhead, a Japanese sniper was watching. 5 minutes earlier, a young private from Ohio had stepped out of his foxhole to clear a jammed feeding mechanism on a machine gun. The sound that followed was not a roar, but a sharp, whip-like snap. The private collapsed instantly, hit squarely through the throat. Now, he lay bleeding into the mud, his boots twitching rhythmically. McDonald wanted to crawl forward, to drag the boy back by his collar, but he knew that movement meant a second bullet. The sniper was not missing. He had already claimed 3 men from King Company since daybreak, all of them killed with precise, single shots to the head or neck. The rest of the platoon was paralyzed. They were heavily armed, backed by mortars, machine guns, and the industrial might of the United States military. Yet they were completely helpless against a single enemy soldier hidden in a tree. The men pressed their faces into the dirt, listening to the agonizingly slow breathing of their dying comrade. Standard military doctrine offered no answer for this. Sweeping the jungle with automatic fire only wasted ammunition. The Japanese smokeless powder left no flash, no vapor trail, and no clue to the shooter's position. McDonald gently slid his right hand down to the weapon resting against his ribs. It was not the standard issue M1 Garand carried by every other Marine in the battalion. It was an old bolt-action Winchester Model 70, a commercial hunting rifle chambered in .30-06, topped with a delicate, long-tubed, unertl telescopic sight. When McDonald had first carried this rifle off the landing craft, the men in his squad had laughed. They called it a mail-order toy. They asked him if he expected the Japanese to stand still while he turned the dial to adjust for the wind, in a war defined by rapid-fire semi-automatic weapons. Bringing a civilian hunting rifle with a fragile glass scope into the muddy, saltwater-soaked jungles of the Pacific seemed like a form of madness. The weapon was slow. It held only 5 rounds. If a squad of enemy soldiers rushed his position, the bolt-action rifle would be useless. But McDonald wasn't thinking about a squad. He was thinking about the single pair of eyes tracking his platoon through the leaves. He slowly rotated his body, inch by inch, shifting his weight off his chest to allow his lungs to expand without moving the ferns around him. He pressed the wooden stock against his hollow cheekbone and peered through the optics. The world inside the scope was a blurry, green labyrinth of moss, vines, and shadows. The light was dying, blocked out by the massive, triple canopy jungle overhead. Finding a camouflage sniper in this terrain was like looking for a specific needle in a burning haystack. Suddenly, a metallic click echoed from the trees above. It was faint, barely audible over the distant thud of artillery, but to McDonald's trained ears, it was unmistakable. It was the sound of a Japanese-era soccer bolt resetting. The sniper was preparing to fire again. McDonald adjusted his grip, his fingers slick with sweat and mud. He knew he would only get one chance. If he fired and missed, the muzzle flash would give away his position instantly, and the next bullet would be meant for him. He exhaled half a breath, holding the crosshair steady on a dark cluster fronds 60 yards away where the shadow seemed just a fraction too dense. His finger tightened on the trigger, waiting for the slightest movement, knowing that the survival of his entire platoon depended on a rifle his own men had mocked. The sound of the shot was a dull, flat thud that barely registered over the constant, dripping static of the rain. 60 yards away, high in the tangled canopy of a massive banyan tree, a shape detached itself from the dark leaves. It fell heavily, crashing to the lower branches before hitting the swampy floor with a wet, final splash. The silence that followed was absolute. For 2 minutes, the men of King Company didn't breathe. Then, slowly, a private from New Jersey raised his head above the muddy rim of his foxhole. He looked toward the banyan tree, then turned his eyes back toward the shallow ditch where McDonald lay. The mocking grin he had worn when they first boarded the transport ships was gone, replaced by a wide, unblinking look of raw shock. MacDonald didn't look back at him. He kept his eye glued to the rubber eyepiece of the long, unnurdled scope, tracking the surrounding branches with his right hand. He slowly lifted the bolt handle of the Winchester Model 70, drew it back to eject the spent casing, and slid it forward again, chambering a fresh .30-06 round. The metallic snick-clack was the only sound in the jungle. One down. But MacDonald knew the rules of this island. The Japanese did not deploy their snipers in isolation. They operated in interlocking nets, hidden deep within the primary jungle to paralyze entire battalions. As the afternoon sun began to dip, throwing long, jagged shadows across the swamp, MacDonald realized he hadn't just saved his platoon. He had just given away his general location to every other shooter in the sector. By the morning of January 13th, the rain had turned the Cape Gloucester perimeter into a soup of gray mud and rotting vegetation. The heat was suffocating, rising off the ground like steam from a boiler. MacDonald moved before dawn, crawling on his belly through a narrow ravine filled with dead fronds. He had discarded his helmet. The steel brim was too loud if it scraped against a branch, and it distorted the silhouette of his head. Instead, he wore a damp green utility cap turned backward, so the bill wouldn't interfere with his scope. The platoon's advance had stalled completely. The company commander had ordered 2 scouting patrols into the thick bamboo grove to the west, but both had been driven back by invisible fire. 2 more Marines were dead, caught in the open while trying to establish a communications line. The enemy was using the terrain perfectly, utilizing the natural blind spots created by the dense, towering roots of the mangrove trees. MacDonald positioned himself between the exposed roots of a fallen mahogany tree. The wood was slick with fungus, but it provided a solid rest for the heavy target barrel of the Winchester. Through the optics, he scanned the edge of the bamboo grove. The light was terrible, a dim, monochromatic green that played tricks on the eyes. Every cluster of leaves looked like a uniform. Every dark knot in a branch looked like a sniper's face. Then he saw it, a tiny, unnatural movement. It wasn't a soldier shifting his weight. It was a single palm frond moving against the pattern of the wind. MacDonald adjusted his focus dial. At 70 yards, the magnification of the unearthly scope revealed a thin wire tied to the frond. The wire led down to a hidden platform nestled in the fork of a tree. The enemy sniper was using the wire to move the foliage deliberately, trying to draw fire and bait the Americans into revealing their positions. MacDonald shifted his crosshairs 2 feet to the left of the moving frond, tracking the trunk. There, wrapped in woven grass matting that perfectly mimicked the bark, was the outline of an arm. He didn't hesitate. He squeezed. The heavy Winchester recoiled against his shoulder. Through the scope, he watched the grass matting rip open as the high-velocity hunting round tore through the bark and the man behind it. The sniper didn't fall. He had strapped himself to the trunk with a leather harness. His body simply slumped forward, hanging limply over a branch like an empty sack. But before MacDonald could cycle bolt, a violent burst of machine gun fire erupted from a hidden bunker 50 yards to his right. The bullets chewed to the mahogany root just inches above his head, showering his face with razor-sharp wooden splinters. The enemy had anticipated his shot. They had set a trap, using their own sniper as bait to pin down the American marksman. MacDonald pressed his chest flat into the mud, holding the Winchester tight against his body to protect the delicate glass lenses of the scope from the flying debris. The machine gun kept firing, a steady, rhythmic pop-pop-pop that tore the jungle apart around him. He was trapped in the open, unable to retreat, and the enemy was slowly walking their fire directly toward his position. The machine gun fire ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a vacuum of sound filled only by the hiss of the rain. MacDonald didn't move. He lay frozen, his chest pressed into the mud, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence was tactical. The gunners were waiting for him to run, waiting for the ferns to rustle. Instead of retreating, MacDonald slowly rolled onto his side, his hands working with practiced, delicate precision. He unlatched a long, unearthly scope from his mounts, sliding the fragile glass tube into a protective canvas pouch inside his utility jacket. Without the optics, the Winchester was just an iron-sighted hunting rifle, but it was light, maneuverable, and free from the telltale lens glare that almost cost him his life. He crawled backward through the thick sludge, using the massive root structure of the mahogany tree as a shield, until he reached a shallow, water-filled depression. He wasn't running. He was flanking. 20 minutes later, MacDonald emerged 70 yards to the flank of the machine gun bunker. Through the dense bamboo, he could see the low, mud-covered log structure. A Japanese gun was peering through the narrow firing slit, scanning the clearing where MacDonald had just been pinned down. MacDonald raised a Winchester, aligning the crude iron sights on the dark opening of the bunker. He didn't have the luxury of distance or magnification now. This was a raw, close-quarters duel. He squeezed the trigger. The heavy .30-06 round punched directly through the narrow slit. The machine gun went silent. Over the next 48 hours, the myth of the mail-order toy died completely. MacDonald worked his way across the Cape Gloucester perimeter, like a ghost, hunting the hunters. By the morning of January 16th, 11 notches were carved into the metal sunshade of his scope. 11 Japanese snipers, the elite marksmen sent to paralyze King Company, had been systematically eliminated by a weapon built for hunting deer in the woods of America. When the platoon finally broke through the jungle sector, advancing into the open air of the airfield, the mood had shifted entirely. Marines who had openly mocked MacDonald's commercial rifle now stepped aside as he passed. Nobody joked about the mail-order toy anymore. They looked at the long, scarred wooden stock with a quiet, unglamorous respect. They understood that the strange weapon had bought their lives. Decades later, the conflict at Cape Gloucester has largely faded into broader, massive tapestry of World War II. The mud has dried, the jungle has reclaimed the foxholes, and the names of the men who fought there are preserved mostly in dusty archive boxes. But if you visit the National Museum of the Marine Corps, you can still find it. The Winchester Model 70 sits quietly behind a pane of clean, temperature-controlled glass. Most visitors walk past it without a second glance. They see an old, slightly weathered piece of steel and American walnut, looking vastly out of place next to the heavy automatic weapons of modern warfare. They see an old hunting rifle. They don't see the 11 men it stopped or the dozens of young Marines it brought home. If you found this look into the hidden human elements of the Pacific War meaningful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help us tell more of these forgotten stories. Let us know in the comments below where you are watching from today. History is not just a collection of dates and battle lines. It is a story of ordinary individuals carrying extraordinary burdens into the darkest corners of the world.